My ex-wife and I divorced about 5 years ago. Nothing dramatic. No screaming matches in court, no cheating scandals, none of the stuff people usually assume. We just reached a point where living together was like living with a coworker you don't particularly like anymore. We agreed to split custody evenly, week on, week off, and for the most part we stuck to it. The kids adjusted better than I expected. Our daughter is the oldest. She turned 18 last summer. Then our boys are 15 and 13. For years I'd had college funds set aside for all three of them. I started those accounts when they were little. Not huge trust fund amounts or anything like that, but enough that if they went to a state university, they wouldn't be buried in debt when they graduated. I've always been proud of that. I grew up in a house where my parents couldn't help me with anything like that. I had loans, work nights, and took forever to finish my degree. I didn't want my kids starting adulthood already underwater, so I made a rule. They get the money after graduating high school, but only if they go to a state university. A real 4-year school, not community college. Maybe that sounds rigid, but in my head it made sense. Employers take those degrees more seriously. At least that's always been my experience. I wanted them to start strong, and honestly, all three of them knew the rule for years. My daughter especially knew it. Last spring, she was filling out financial aid paperwork for college. She came over during my week and asked me for my tax returns because they needed both parents' information for the forms. I sat down with her at the kitchen table while she was going through everything. She had her laptop open, a bunch of tabs, and those FOFSA forms that look like tax documents had a baby with a spreadsheet. At some point, I leant over and saw the school name she had typed in. It was our local community college. I genuinely thought maybe it was just a placeholder or something. Like she hadn't filled out the university part yet. So I asked her about it. She didn't look nervous or guilty or anything. She just said, kind of casually, that her mom suggested it because the community college was waiving tuition for first-time students. She said something like, "It'll save you money." That's when I felt that tight feeling start creeping up my neck. I told her that if she were planning to go to community college, then she didn't need my financial information because I had already made it clear I wasn't supporting that plan. She looked confused at first, then annoyed. She said she thought when I said I wouldn't support community college, I meant I wouldn't pay for it, like financially. But since it was free, she thought it wouldn't matter. I told her that wasn't what I meant and she knew it. And I did say that. Pretty bluntly, I told her she was trying to take the easy way out. The conversation went downhill fast after that. I don't even remember exact sentences because it turned into one of those arguments where you both start talking over each other and the words blur together. I remember her saying community college transfers to universities all the time. I remember saying that employers still look at the final degree and the path matters. At some point, she said her mom agreed with her. That probably didn't help. I told her if she were going to ignore what we talked about for years, then she shouldn't expect my help with the paperwork. She got really quiet after that. And then I did something I wish I could undo now. I stood up and walked out, not dramatically. I didn't slam anything. I just grabbed my keys and left the house because I could feel myself getting angrier and I didn't want to say something worse. In my head, it was just cooling off. That's how our arguments usually went. Someone storms off, everyone calms down overnight, and the next day it's awkward, but fine. Except this time, it didn't reset like that. A few days later, she told me she had contacted the financial aid office and asked if she could submit the forms with only her mother's information. Apparently, that's something you can request if the other parent refuses to cooperate. It's not easy, but there's a process. I remember feeling almost impressed, if I'm being honest. She had always been stubborn like that. If she decided to solve something, she'd keep pushing until someone gave her an answer. But the process took months, long enough that by the time everything was approved, the enrollment deadlines for most of the universities had already passed, which meant she couldn't start school in the fall. Instead, she got a job. Retail somewhere in town. When she told me that part, it didn't sound like she was asking for sympathy. It sounded like she was closing a door. She said since I clearly wasn't going to help her, she was planning to move in with her mom full-time once she turned 18. Which happened in the summer. I told her she was being ridiculous, that she had sabotaged herself, that if she had just applied to an actual university like we talked about, none of this would have happened. She told me she hated me. After that, she barely spoke to me the rest of the time. She was still technically splitting weeks between houses. She would come over, stay in her room, and leave again. Then her birthday came and she moved out. And that was it. I guess part of me assumed she'd come around eventually. Teenagers say they hate their parents all the time. My sister told my dad that once, and now they talk every day. Months passed. Summer turned into fall, then winter. My daughter didn't call, didn't text, not on holidays, not on my birthday, nothing. And I guess I sort of filed it away mentally as teenage drama and focused on the boys when they were with me. School, soccer practice, all the normal stuff. Until this morning. My youngest was eating his breakfast before school, and he just said, kind of out of nowhere, that he misses his sister being around when they stay at my house. He said the house feels different now. Then he said he wishes I hadn't been so harsh with her. Kids have a way of saying things like that without realizing how hard they land. I didn't really know what to say back, because if I'm being honest, part of me still thinks I was right about the college thing. I still believe a 4-year university would set her up better. But another part of me keeps thinking about that moment at the kitchen table, the look on her face when I said she was taking the easy way out, and I'm starting to wonder if that was the point where something shifted between us that I didn't notice until it was already too late. Continuation. It's been a while since I originally wrote about the situation with my daughter. A few people asked for an update after I mentioned my youngest son telling me he missed having his sister around. I didn't respond at the time because, honestly, not much had happened then. Unfortunately, that didn't stay the case. A lot has happened over the past several months, and I'm realizing the situation is a lot more complicated than I originally thought. I'm not sure if I handled things the right way, but I also still think some of the criticism I got before ignored a few things. Anyway, I'll start from the beginning. After my youngest said that to me, I thought about reaching out to my daughter. I didn't end up calling her though. Instead, I did what I probably shouldn't have done. I wrote an email. My thinking at the time was that writing it out would let me explain things clearly without it turning into another shouting match. I addressed it to both my daughter and my ex-wife because my ex had been the one encouraging the community college decision in the first place. The email was long, probably longer than it needed to be. I explained again why I had always pushed the 4-year university path. I included some articles and statistics I'd found about graduation rates and employer hiring preferences. I wasn't trying to insult anyone, but I did say that starting at community college often leads to people never finishing their degree. I also wrote that I felt like my daughter had ignored an agreement we talked about for years. At the end of the email, I said that if she was willing to reconsider and transfer to a state university after her first year, I would be open to discussing using the college fund at that point. That's what I meant when I wrote it. I thought I was offering a compromise. She didn't respond. Instead, a few days later, my sister texted me asking why I had sent that email. Apparently, my daughter had forwarded it to a few family members because she was upset about it. Suddenly, my phone was blowing up with messages from relatives telling me I was being controlling. That annoyed me more than anything. None of them had been involved in the original situation, and suddenly they were weighing in like they knew everything. My ex-wife called me that evening and told me I needed to stop trying to bully our daughter into changing her plans. We argued for almost an hour. After that, communication between me and my daughter went from non-existent to actively hostile. She never responded to the email itself, but a few weeks later, I saw something she posted on social media about parents who care more about control than support. She didn't mention me by name, but it didn't take a genius to figure out what she meant. Around that time, I also found out that she had officially enrolled at the community college for the spring semester. I didn't hear that from her. I heard it from my 15-year-old. The boys still split time between houses, so they see her pretty regularly. Apparently, she talks to them normally and just refuses to interact with me. Not long after that, I made another decision that people will probably criticize. I moved the money that had been set aside for her college fund into the accounts for my 2 sons. My reasoning was simple. She had made it clear she wasn't going to follow the conditions I set for using it. The boys might. I didn't announce that decision publicly or anything. It was just something I did with the accounts. But eventually, the boys found out. The younger one mentioned it to his sister at their mom's house, and she apparently took that as confirmation that I had punished her. That's when things escalated again. About 2 months ago, I decided I was tired of all the indirect communication and rumors going through everyone else. I found out where she was working, a clothing store at a shopping center not too far from my office, and I stopped by one afternoon. In hindsight, that probably wasn't the best place to try to have a serious conversation. She was behind the counter when I walked in. When she saw me, she immediately looked uncomfortable. I told her I just wanted to talk. She said she was working. I said it would only take a minute. The conversation was awkward from the start. She kept glancing around because customers were nearby. I tried to explain again that my issue had never been about her education itself. It was about the path she chose. She told me she didn't want to do this at work. I said that was the only place she'd given me an opportunity to talk since she refused to answer calls or messages. At that point, a manager walked over and asked if everything was okay. My daughter said yes, but also asked if she could go to the back for a minute. The manager asked me to leave, so that conversation ended pretty quickly. A few weeks later, there was another incident, this time involving the boys. My 15-year-old mentioned during dinner that he might want to start at community college too when he graduates. He said it pretty casually, like he was just thinking out loud. I'll admit I reacted strongly. I told him that was exactly the kind of short-sighted thinking that leads people to settle for less than they're capable of. I reminded him about the college funds and the expectations attached to them. The conversation turned into a lecture that probably lasted longer than it should have. Later I found out he told his sister about it. Then Thanksgiving came around. My parents hosted dinner like they usually do. My daughter agreed to come even though she knew I'd be there. I actually thought that might mean she was ready to talk. For most of the meal, we avoided each other. Then, at one point, someone asked her how school was going. She started talking about a program she was in through the community college that connects students with internships at local companies. I probably should have kept my mouth shut. Instead, I asked if that was actually through the college or if her mother had arranged it through someone she knew. She immediately got defensive. I said I just found it hard to believe a community college program would lead to something that competitive. The table got quiet after that. My daughter stood up, said she didn't come there to be interrogated, and left before dessert. My mother later told me I should have let the subject go. Maybe she's right. The last thing that happened was about 3 weeks ago. Apparently that internship program she mentioned is legitimate. She was accepted into a position with a small tech company in the city that works with both the community college and a nearby university. I heard about it from my brother first, not from her. When I eventually brought it up with the boys, just asking if it was true, they confirmed it. My initial reaction was skepticism. I asked if her mom had connections there or something like that. The boys got annoyed with me. My youngest actually said something that stuck with me. He said, "Why does everything she does have to be wrong to you?" I didn't have a good answer for that. At this point, my daughter still hasn't spoken to me directly in almost a year. She talks to her brothers, she talks to her mom, and she talks to the rest of the family. Just not me. I still believe I had valid reasons for the rules I set. But I'm starting to realize that even if I was right about some things, the way everything played out might have done more damage than I expected. And now I'm not really sure how to fix it. Continuation. It's been a few months and things have gotten worse. A lot worse, actually. I didn't think that was possible considering where things already stood with my daughter, but apparently it was. I guess the place to start is with something that happened not long after the holidays. For context, my daughter is still attending the community college she chose last year. She's also still doing that internship program I mentioned before. I still haven't spoken to her directly since the argument at Thanksgiving. She talks to her mother, the boys, and basically everyone else in the family. Just not me. At first I tried to ignore it, but the whole financial aid thing had always bothered me. The way she managed to submit the FOFSA without my information never really sat right with me. From my perspective, the forms are supposed to require both parents' financial information unless there's a serious reason not to include one of them. I didn't feel like simply refusing to support a specific school qualified as that, so I contacted the financial aid office at the college. Before anyone jumps on me for that, I wasn't trying to sabotage her. I was trying to understand how the process worked. I told them I was her father and that I had concerns that my financial information had been excluded from the forms. I asked if that was even allowed. The person I spoke to didn't give me many details, which I expected, but they did say they would note the concern. At the time, I didn't think much of it beyond that. A few weeks later, my youngest mentioned that my daughter had been dealing with some kind of paperwork issue with financial aid again. Apparently, her account got flagged for review. He didn't say that was because of me, but I can't imagine it was a coincidence either. Not long after that, the situation with my son started getting more complicated too. My 15-year-old brought up college again one night while he was staying with me. He said he'd been talking with his sister about different options and that starting at community college might actually make sense financially. Hearing that again after everything that happened set me off. I told him that was exactly the kind of thinking that led to people settling for less. I reminded him that I had saved money for years specifically so my kids wouldn't have to make decisions based purely on cost. He said he understood that, but that maybe there were other paths that worked too. That conversation stuck with me for a few days. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't want to go through another situation like the one with my daughter where everyone claimed they misunderstood the expectations. So I did something that, at the time, seemed reasonable to me. I drafted a written agreement. It basically outlined the conditions attached to the college funds for the boys. Things like attending a 4-year university, maintaining a certain GPA, and using the money only for tuition and housing, things like that. I wrote it out clearly so there wouldn't be any confusion. When I came over the next weekend, I sat them down and explained it. I told them I didn't want a repeat of what happened with their sister where everyone pretended the rules weren't clear. The older one didn't say much during the conversation, but he looked uncomfortable. The younger one asked if he had to sign it right then. I told them they could think about it, but that the expectations weren't going to change. Apparently, they told their sister about the document. I didn't know that at the time. The next thing that happened was about a month ago. My ex mentioned during a quick call about scheduling that my daughter had some kind of presentation event at her college for the internship program she's part of. Students were presenting projects they'd worked on with the companies they were placed with. She said it casually, like a normal parent sharing something about their kid. I decided to go. Part of me was curious about the program since I still didn't fully understand how it worked. Another part of me probably wanted to see for myself whether it was actually as impressive as everyone kept claiming. I didn't tell my daughter I was coming. When I got there, the campus looked exactly how you'd expect a small community college to look. A couple of buildings, a parking lot full of commuter cars. Nothing like the universities I had always imagined my kids attending. The event itself was in a conference room where students had posters and presentations set up. I walked around for a while before I saw her. She was standing near one of the displays talking with a few people, including what looked like a supervisor from the company she was interning with. When she noticed me, her entire expression changed, not angry at first, just tense. After the conversation she was having ended, she walked over and asked why I was there. I told her I wanted to see what she'd been working on. She said something along the lines of, "You've made it pretty clear what you think about this place." I said that didn't mean I couldn't still be interested in what she was doing. The conversation didn't last long. She told me she was busy with the event and that if I wanted to look around I could, but she didn't really engage with me after that. I ended up leaving early. A couple weeks after that, something happened with my older son that I honestly wasn't prepared for. We were driving back from one of his practices when he brought up the college topic again. At first I thought it was going to be another discussion about community college. Instead, he told me something that kind of stopped me cold. He said that if things kept going the way they were between me and his sister, he wasn't sure he wanted to keep coming over as much once he turned 18. I asked what he meant. He said he didn't want to end up in the same situation she was in where one disagreement turned into being cut off. That was the first time I realized he had been thinking about the possibility of going no contact with me. I reacted badly, I'll admit that. I told him that his sister's situation was completely different because she had chosen to ignore the expectations that had been laid out for years. I said she had crossed multiple lines, choosing her mother's side, refusing the help that was offered to her, and then acting like she was the victim when there were consequences. He said that wasn't how she described it. That's when the conversation really went downhill. I told him that if his sister kept going down the path she was on, she was going to end up regretting it. I said that choosing the easy options early in life often leads to bigger problems later. I even said something along the lines of how people who take shortcuts in education often end up stuck in bad jobs and unstable relationships. I probably went too far. At one point, I said that if she kept making the kind of decisions she had been making lately, she could easily end up dating some loser who drags her down even further. He got really quiet after that. When we got home, he went straight to his room. Later that night, he told me he didn't want to talk about college with me anymore. He also said something that honestly shook me more than anything else that's happened during this whole situation. He said he was scared that if he made the wrong decision about his future, I would cut him off the same way I had with his sister. That's when it really hit me how differently he was interpreting everything that had happened. From my perspective, the conflict with my daughter started because she deliberately ignored an agreement we had talked about for years. From his perspective, it looked like one disagreement with me led to his sister disappearing from my life entirely. After that conversation, I stopped bringing up the contract. I haven't asked either of the boys to sign it again. I also told him that he could choose whatever educational path he thought was right for him when the time came, but I also told him something else that I still believe. I told him that what happened with his sister wasn't just about college, it was about respect and accountability. I told him that I wouldn't allow someone to treat me the way she had and then expect everything to go back to normal. He didn't respond to that. Since then, things have been tense. He still comes over, but he's quieter than he used to be. Conversations feel more careful, like he's measuring what he says. And my daughter still hasn't spoken to me at all. At this point, it's been almost a year. Part of me keeps thinking that eventually she'll realize that I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was trying to set her up for success. But another part of me is starting to realize that the longer this goes on, the harder it's going to be to fix. Especially now that the boys have started forming their own opinions about everything that happened. Analysis. Alright, so let's talk about this story because there's actually a lot going on here beneath the surface. On the face of it, this is a pretty common family conflict. A parent thinks they're setting clear expectations, a teenager wants autonomy, and things spiral. But what makes this situation interesting, and honestly kind of uncomfortable, is how the father keeps escalating things while still believing he's the reasonable one. And that's really the core of this story. The narrator genuinely thinks he's acting logically and responsibly. In his mind, the entire conflict started because his daughter ignored a long-standing rule about college. He believes he made a deal with his kids, he saved money for their education, and in return they would attend a 4-year university. To him, that's not control, it's structure. It's preparation for adulthood. But here's where things start to break down. From the daughter's perspective, the rule wasn't just about money. It was about control over her life decisions. Community college isn't some fringe option anymore. Tons of students use it as a stepping stone to transfer into universities while saving money. And that's clearly what she was trying to do. But instead of hearing that plan out, the father immediately framed it as laziness or taking the easy way out. That moment is the emotional trigger for everything that follows. What's really striking is how the father repeatedly doubles down after that initial conflict. Almost every action he takes after the argument is framed as him clarifying or defending himself, but the effect is always escalation. Take the email he sends to his daughter and ex-wife. From his perspective, it's a rational explanation. He's presenting statistics, explaining his reasoning, and even offering the compromise about transferring later. But emotionally, that email probably feels like a lecture. It reinforces the idea that he doesn't respect her decision or trust her judgment, and the fact that she forwards it to relatives suggests she sees it as controlling or unfair. And once the conflict becomes public within the family, things get even worse. The father becomes focused on defending his reputation rather than repairing the relationship. That's a really human reaction, but it's also where the situation starts to spiral. When you start arguing about who's right instead of addressing how people feel, reconciliation becomes almost impossible. Then there's the FAFSA incident, which is honestly one of the most telling moments in the story. He insists he wasn't trying to sabotage her financial aid when he contacted the college, but realistically, that's exactly how it looks from the outside. If your daughter has already gone no contact with you, and then suddenly her financial aid gets flagged after you call the office questioning her paperwork, that's going to feel like retaliation, even if that wasn't his intention. Intent versus impact is a huge theme here. The father repeatedly insists that his intentions were good, he wanted his kids to succeed, he wanted them to have strong degrees, and he wanted to protect their future. But the impact of his actions is that his daughter feels controlled and judged. And that gap between intention and impact is what keeps widening the conflict. Another really important moment in the story is the contract he drafts for his sons. On paper, that's a logical move. He wants to prevent misunderstandings. But emotionally, it sends a very different message. Instead of showing that he learned from the conflict with his daughter, it suggests he's doubling down on the same rigid expectations. So when the boys show the contract to their sister, it reinforces her narrative that their father cares more about control than understanding. Then we get to the campus visit, which is almost painfully awkward. The father frames it as curiosity, but showing up unannounced to an event your daughter didn't invite you to, especially after months of silence, is bound to feel intrusive, and her reaction says everything. She doesn't explode or cause a scene, she just becomes tense and distant. That kind of quiet rejection often hurts more than open anger, but the most significant moment in the entire update isn't the daughter at all, it's the older son. When the son tells his dad he might go no contact someday, that's the real turning point. For the first time, the father sees how his behavior is being interpreted by someone else. In his mind, the situation with his daughter was about consequences for breaking an agreement. But from his son's perspective, it looks like their dad cut off his sister over a disagreement about college. That difference in perception is huge. And the father's reaction during that conversation is honestly heartbreaking in a different way. Instead of reassuring his son immediately, he launches into another defense of why the daughter was wrong. He even starts predicting that she'll end up in a bad relationship or struggling in life because of her choices. That's the moment where his frustration turns into something harsher, almost like he needs her to fail in order to prove he was right. And that's a really dangerous emotional trap. Because once someone's identity becomes tied to being right, admitting mistakes starts to feel impossible. The son's reaction shows the real damage of that mindset. He becomes scared that if he makes the wrong decision in life, his father might treat him the same way. That fear changes the entire family dynamic. The father does soften a little bit after that. He backs off the contract and tells his son he can choose his own path. But even then, he can't fully let go of his resentment towards his daughter. He still frames her actions as disrespectful and unforgivable. So the story ends in this really uncomfortable place. The father is starting to recognize the consequences of his behavior, but he hasn't fully accepted responsibility for them. The daughter is still completely no contact. And now the sons are caught in the middle, trying to navigate a relationship with a parent who they're starting to see in a different light. What makes this story compelling isn't that anyone is a cartoon villain, it's that everyone's behavior feels painfully realistic. The daughter wants independence. The father wants control disguised as protection. The sons want peace between the people they love. And the tragedy of the situation is that none of those goals are inherently unreasonable. But the way they collide turns a disagreement about college into something much bigger, a breakdown of trust inside a family.